Hello. I, like millions of others, have a pet dog. I love her. She's great. And for the most part, everything is fantastic. Well, except for the pet clutter. The toys, the treats, and more specifically, the leashes. When you go to take her for a walk, you lay it down, they get tripped over, they get shoved places, and you can never find one or they're kind of in the way. So one of my solutions to this is to create a pet leash holder, something cute that matches your house and is super easy then to find a home for your leashes and to hang them back up when you're done. So when it comes to be walk time, you and your furry family member always know where your leash is. The first step in creating our dog leash holder is to decide what do we want our dog leash holder to look like. For this example, I am creating a basic square one with a dog that has a leash as a tail and then a custom word. A couple other options I've done in the past is I've done a bone with engraving with 3 hooks. I've done a paw, and I've done either 2 hooks or 1 larger hook in the center. I've also done a dog head and then more of a rectangular with multiple hooks with home on it. The possibilities are endless. You can let your creativity go wild. The first step was for me to decide what size I want to make this. I decided to go with 9 1/4 and 9 1/4 because I know a 1 by 10 is 9.25 inches, so I decided to go ahead and make this square. Next, I found a dog I liked. Well, I sort of found a dog I like. I found body parts of a couple different dogs, and I ended up using slice and weld to come up with one complete dog. And then I'm like, I think my dog needs a collar. And I'm using Cricut Design Space to create this. So I used one of the new tools or new parts they got, which is segmental arch. If you go over to shape, you can see there's a whole bunch of different shapes. So I thought that kind of looked like a dog collar. So I used that segmental arch to create my collar. And then for words, I do quite a few craft shows, so I kind of stuck with wolf for this example because it's generic and it goes with any dog. But you could also make it custom. For example, my dog's name is Bailey. So there, we can add her name in if I wanted to. In this case, we'll do wolf. Bark, walk, question mark, whatever you want. If you are not cutting these parts out of wood and want to stencil it on or use Cricut vinyl or some other process, you do need to make sure that these letters are kerned, which means that they're all pushed together, so that way there's no gaps in your letters, and that they are welded or united. Back in the day, pre-Unite, we had other software I believe still uses weld, but I would always say create a copy of the original, then hide it, and then make this one your welded, because once you weld, you can't unweld, and then if you wanted to go back and do it again, you can never remember what the font was. But now it's great that they have Unite, so now you can undo Unite. I really do like that tool. So you may be asking, well, how am I going to get my design from this into my laser? Well, here is a solution. So this is just my background, so we'll move him out of the way. So we got my dog collar. I'll get that out of the way. Get this close. This close. And I try to get my wood as close as possible because, well, wood's expensive and we don't want to waste it. Get a dog collar out of the way. So that way it's all kind of contained within the boundaries of the box. Make that black. Make sure everything's the same black. Okay. How am I going to take a screenshot and get rid of that background? Well, if you go to these 3 dots or 3 lines, go to settings, canvas, you can make it no grid. Now you got a plain white backdrop. I have a MacBook, but other software is different how you take your screenshots. Like on my work computer, I have a screen snippet tool, or I think it's control print screen. So I use Control Shift 5, highlight my dog, and it by default, I have it set up to save to my desktop. Now with laser cutting software, you still need to have it as an SVG to be able to cut. Right here, you can see my dog. So kind of a cool website that's free, but I'm sure they appreciate donations to them, is PNG to SVG. And then there's other like tools you could use in software, but we're going to do this for quick and easy today because my design's simple. If it's a more complicated design, I'm going to say this isn't great because it takes a lot of cleanup, but for something as simple as this, it does work well. Here's my dog. I'm going to drag and drop it. And you can select your color. It comes up with colors, but I always go down to just one color. Click. Make sure it's black. Hit generate. We got my dog. You can download it. Drag and drop it. And now we have one dog SVG. Next, we'll go into the software for the laser. I have an X-Tools diode laser. I got it just a few months ago, and I have Lightburn I need to learn how to use in other software, but with the busy fall crash show season, it's on my to-do list. So I've been using their free software, which it's okay. So we have my dog. We're going to drag and drop it. And then I know he is 8 inches tall. So now we have an 8-inch tall dog. Change it to cut. I have my parameter set as 3mm pine. And now I am ready to make. So I can hit press, and it's 100% power and 5mm per second. I will say I've done test cuts on this particular material, and I've cut multiple things. So I do know that this is a good speed setting for the 3mm. And I'm actually using Baltic birch, but I set it at pine because I find that tends to be pretty right where I need my parameters. Hit process, and then I place my piece of wood in the laser, and I hit framing, and I can check it, make sure that everything is lined up, and then go ahead and cut my dog.
The next step of creating our dog leash holder is to cut the base plate or board that we were going to use to put our wolf and doggy on and our hanging hardware. I designed it to be at 9 1/4 by 9 1/4 inches because a 1 by 10 is approximately 9.25 inches, so that way it's square. So I will mark 9 1/4 to make my cut. Now it is important to remember safety, so I have safety as my earmuffs, my safety glasses, and then I also will go and turn on the dust collector and make that cut. We have now made our cut, so we have our baseboard, and as you can see, our wolf fits perfectly on here, and our hardware will go there for our leash hanger. The next step is to go ahead and sand our project. Here is our base. I did go ahead and put a round over on the router with it. I didn't videotape that, but it's completely optional. You can do it, not do it. You can just sand the edges, whatever you want to do for your project. I have my dust mask, safety glasses, hearing protection. This one isn't too bad for sounds. It just produces a little bit more dust than some of the other processes because I do have a pretty big dust collector, but this just has the small bag. I have an orbital sander, and I have the 180 grit on it now, and I'll go up to 220, and I usually just do a little bit of sanding because it's not too bad being a leash holder and just some basic wood. I will do more or less sanding depending on what the project is. So we'll go ahead and get started with sanding. Now it is time for us to stain our dog leash holders. I have everything laid out that we will need. I have my bases and my words. I am doing 3 of them this time, so there's a couple of extra more than you would need. I have my can opener, 2 foam brushes for the 2 colors, paint sticks. I have 2 colors of stain. I am going to do the base of these in Early American. Then I'm going to do the wolf and the dog in dark walnut. Then I'm going to actually paint the little collar shred to give them a little splash of color. I also have disposable vinyl gloves because you don't want to get the stain on your hands. It's kind of gross and a pain to get off. You have to get it with like a mineral spirits or something. Prefer not to. And then I have some paper towels. I use the Cottonelles because I don't get lint with them, or a shop towel, or old rags. As a warning, these can be flammable, so either lay them out to dry if you're using rags before you clean them, or dispose of them right away. I have a dumpster, so I will take these out and put them in the dumpster. So that way they can be outside, away from any buildings, and that way we don't have to worry about fire risks. And I'll do that at the end of this video, so. We will go ahead and get started staining. Okay, I have opened up my 2 stains and I have stirred them with stain and polyacrylic. We always stir, don't shake. And then I also just remembered that you can get smaller cans of stain if you have a project that you're not going to be using very much of. It's more economical to get the larger containers, but it will go bad occasionally. It gets into like a gel or gets hard or dries out, or stain can be a little temperamental. So if it's something you're not going to use very often, you can get the smaller cans. And I am using the Varathane brand. You can get it at either, I think Walmart, they just call it Rust-Oleum. I think it's by Rust-Oleum. Then at Menards or Home Depot. You can't get it at Lowe's. You can only get the Minwax there. And I prefer this over the Minwax. I feel like it's a little less splashy. And I like the fact that I can get it on one coat and it dries fast. We will start with our base plates because we are going to do these first because I have to do the back side of these, whereas I don't need to do the back side of the letters. With staining, depending on what you're doing, you may want to use a pre-stain, which will get like the moisture in depending on how wet or dry your wood is. If you're using an older wood, maybe put on a pre-stain. Basically that does is soak in so it doesn't look as splotchy. I am not particularly doing that today. You can see a little on your brush, and make sure you follow a light coat with the wood grain. Then to get the sides too. And I tend to do just a nice light coat because I'm going to wipe off the excess a little later to help save product. Nice even coat. The nice thing about staining is it goes pretty fast. Particularly if you're doing large flat surfaces like this, there's not as many cracks and crevices to worry about. You can get it on. And then for a project like this, I would generally speaking let it dry 5-6 minutes. So basically by the time I get done, I see right now on my clock, I have a clock that's right behind the camera, so I have this huge clock in my shop, which is great because I can keep track of time and watch it. So I know about what time I started, so I know I want to wait about the 5 minutes or so before I take it off. And how long you wait kind of depends on how long you want it to be and how dried out your wood is. If it's a drier wood, it's going to go a lot quicker. And then I've also discovered certain colors take to wood a lot faster than other colors. I have no clue why, but briar smoke particularly feel like it takes the quickest, the fastest. Maybe something with the pigmentation. Anybody knows why? I would love to hear the answer. But once in a great while, it doesn't. No clue. We'll go ahead and get our last one. I tend to do the sides first so I don't have to watch out for thumbprints. And then I also tend to do the top with the sides first. Then I can flip and do the bottom just so it decreases my chances of anything from the sides running over and causing some splotchiness on the top of my wood. Follow the wood grain. So now we have the tops of these done. I'll let these dry a few more minutes and then we will come back and we will wipe them off. And I have waited 5 or 6 minutes to go ahead and get started. And I know I did 1, 2, 3, so I'll go ahead and wipe them in the same order. I'll get my paper towel. And here again, I kind of do the same thing I did before. I'll start with the edges. Get them wiped first. Again, following the wood grain to try to not get any. Let me check it one more time. Watching out for fingerprints. And we have that one done. Luckily, this goes pretty quick. I feel like staining is one of those processes that is definitely a hurry up and wait. The nice thing about staining versus painting, when you're wiping, if you have any little spots like in your wood grain it didn't quite get, the wiping motion kind of also helps distribute the stain into any little light crevices. So I have this way. And we'll move on to our third one. And the tops of all three of these are completed. So I'll set that aside. I will take another one just to kind of wipe my hands off a little so I don't have to waste another set of gloves. Next up, we will go over and take on the dog and wolf. This is the exact same process. Only difference is I just do the one side. And always make sure to stir well because you get the color, it kind of settles to the bottom of these. You can kind of see a little on the stick. And I get these large popsicle sticks, work great as stain stir sticks. You can buy them, they sell them as like paint sticks at Menards, or you could also buy them like at craft stores as large popsicle sticks. Same difference. Again, we are following our wood grain. This I'm not as concerned about the sides, just a little bit because I have like the dark stain from the laser. So it makes it a little easier to get. Don't forget to check your clock so you know how long you want to let it sit. And plywood does take stain a little differently as a warning than pine, because every color of wood. So if you're not really sure how it's going to look, test on a small piece of scrap first to see if you like the color. I have built these before, so I already knew how this was going to look. And I've obviously used a lot of dark walnut and early American. They're pretty popular colors. I will go ahead and finish staining these, wait the 5 minutes, and then we will come back to wipe. We have applied the stain. It's time to now wipe it off of our dogs. So again, following my wood grain, you can see it's a nice contrast with the early American. And these aren't too bad to do because, again, the letters in this plywood soaks the stain up really fast. So after I'm done wiping all the stain off, the dry time for staining is about an hour, at least according to the instructions. I just double checked. And then after an hour, you can either do another coat of stain if you want to, then wait an additional hour, or if you're ready, you can go ahead and then apply any protective coats like a polyacrylic, which I'll do poly in a little bit later. But this is a good time to check to see if any of your spots are lighter or darker or than you wanted. Like I may go ahead and put a second coat on this dog because he's a lot lighter than that. We'll see how the others two look. That is one advantage of using a stain separate from just a polyacrylic and a stain or two-in-one, is it gives you a little bit more flexibility with darkening your colors. And as a note, wood will always come off looking slightly different depending on your wood grain and your wood type. Now all of our stuff is stained. I will let it dry and go ahead and work on painting those leashes. I'll just do that off camera. It's pretty simple. You can make them painted, stained, no leash, add a leash, any color you want to go with your decor. It's pretty much up to you. So we'll let everything dry and then I will do the back side of that and then I'll be back when it's time to polyacrylic. Now that our staining is done, it's time for us to poly. And as you can see, the fronts and the back of these are now stained. I do use these paint corners to help kind of keep things off the surfaces. And there was a mark on this, I don't know if anybody noticed, I didn't like it. So I went ahead and sanded a little more and kind of restained that one to make it just look a little bit nicer. So there are a couple different types of protection you could use, but for this project, I'm just using an exterior spar urethane. It comes in a spray or liquid. I go through a lot of exterior, so I buy it by the gallon. So I'm using a satin for both. I tend to use the liquid that's water-based far more than the spray just because of expense. But for things like the wolf or the real small details, I find the spray a little bit easier. I will give a word of warning to not use this on a very lighter white. It will kind of yellow it. I discovered this when I tried to spray some white ghosts. That was fun. That's sarcasm right there. And for spray painting, you got to look for the silver lining in things. I live on a farm. I have a series of doggy doors that my dog uses to go out to a fenced-in yard to come into the house. And then I have a heated and air-conditioned garage. So she is out here. She's not exactly roughing it. But the problem is I live on a farm and there's various wildlife, such as farm cats, that appear. So I tried to buy these to put on top of her dog box in various places. It didn't work. They're smarter than the mats. So I didn't know what to do with them. Then I saw online that somebody was using these to spray paint. So I tried that and they work great. So I don't recommend for farm cats. I highly recommend for spray painting. Look at the positive. So first, poly, we will go ahead and I just use a regular paintbrush for this versus the foam because this is water-based. So I am able to wash the brush when I'm done and reuse it. And then I'm going to go ahead and use a spray for over here. With polyacrylic, the key is to put very light, thin coats on, and then you have to wait about an hour, I believe, if I read the instructions, and then a light sand, and then second and third coat, or how many coats you want. And the same is true for this oil-based. So I tend to use one of these for these light sand jobs. I have like a 220 on here. They come in different grits, or for smaller things, I have a little micro tool, and it also comes in various grits. These are great for sanding. I've got multiple shapes and multiple of these shoved everywhere. I don't even know where they all are. So we'll go ahead, light coats, and I have already stirred this up. And again, like with the stain, I start at the top. So that way any drips or any issues that you have will go towards the bottom. And then when I do this bottom, I can go ahead and just do the bottom and not have to worry about the sides. And the key is to go on thin because this is self-leveling. So it will, over time, settle and move into the crevices, which means you have to really watch for runs or glops. And this has definitely been a learning curve for me as I've learned to do this. on nice and thin. And you're better to put several light coats on than one big heavy coat. Because as you can see, it does settle, and you will end up, if you aren't careful, with globs. And make sure also when you're polying to follow the grain. And the reason that we always stir, we never shake, is because the last thing you want in your polyacrylic is air bubbles. Go over this again. There's a spot that's a little darker. Then what usually I'll do is after I go through all of the projects I'm doing, I'll go back and double check all of them to make sure that we don't have any runs as the poly settles. And you'll be surprised. You'll go through and check and come back a few minutes later and see when you didn't. So you kind of have to keep an eye on it, particularly for the first few minutes until it kind of settles to where it wants to be. Because nothing is worse than having to deal with a poly run. I'll go ahead and do this one, do the rest later. Next, we'll go ahead and spray these. I have gone through and checked to try to make sure I've got all of the dust, any lint, anything off of these, just so I get a nice clean finish. I tend to spray kind of at an angle and try to get like the sides so I don't flood the top. So then I will come on the other side, be out the camera for a second. Then I'll go ahead and just put a quick coat on our leash collars. They're a little too small to sit on top of the grid. I don't know if you can tell, but here you can see this has turned a little yellow. So that's like an example of like the yellowing issue that you could run into. But for things that are red or brown or all these colors, it's no big deal. It's very subtle. It only really matters if you're using a very light white or light gray stain. Then I would recommend sticking with a water-based poly. I will go ahead, finish polyacrylic to the top. About an hour or so, I'll do a light sand, do a second, maybe a third coat, flip and repeat. And then I will do the same for these. And then once we're done with the polyacrylic, we will go ahead and move on to adding all of the hardware and assembly. We are almost done with this project. We're just down to the last couple final steps. First, what I usually do is I go through and get my dog and wolf glued on to my board. You could use a couple different kinds of glue, wood glue, or this is just clear Gorilla Glue. The kicker is you have to watch for the no foam because the brown version of this foams and it creates a huge mess. I usually just put some glue on the back of my pieces and then stick it all on and either put a heavy book or clamp it down or something to try to help get that bond. It takes about an hour to dry. I'm just going to skip this kind of step right now because I don't want to get the glue on my fingers when trying to record. But it's pretty straightforward. If you know how to glue, I think you guys can handle it. So then the next step is adding the hardware. So I glued this about an hour or so ago. So now we got the glue all on this particular piece to be able to add our hardware. I recommend flipping over and adding the hanging hardware first. So I have my hanging hardware, my screws, and then I had already drawn lines on here to line it up. So I knew I wanted this one here and here. So I'll do the first one. And I always try to get this top first. Make sure I get it all straight. And then put a straight edge or a ruler. Line it up so I know that we're going to be level. Then I have my line on the other one. pretty happy with how that looks. You can pre-drill, but I've used these enough times. I know I haven't really had any wood splitting issues, and I'm pretty far away from the edge of the wood, so it hasn't really been an issue. And now you can see I'm all lined up. Make sure I'm happy with the levelness. I feel like this one probably needs to come up just a tiny bit. It's better. Then we can go ahead and put in the other 4 screws. Just double checking, making sure everything's still lined up. I feel we now have our hanging hardware on. Next up is our hooks. And the reason I do the hanging first is once you put this hook on, you kind of end up with a lot of, it'd be pretty wonky to try to put the hanging hardware on second. Again, I have my ruler. Kind of want to make sure these are all the same, so I have this about 4/10. It's about 4/10. More like a 1/2 inch. Make sure my dog is centered. This is intense, by the way. So 1 3/2 tenths. Usually I use like 30 seconds most tape measures, but this just happens to be when I grabbed. As you can see. I have my dog leash all nice and lined up. Nice and centered. Double check everything one final time. There. Nice and straight. We now have one completed leash hanger. This would be great for your entryway. This is a nice small one because it's only 9 inches wide, so it can fit in a lot of little places by a door or by a back door or in a garage or anywhere you need to hang your dog leashes. And it keeps them visual. And I use a bigger hook on this for people that have larger leashes. I have a couple other designs I've done. This one I did with a double hook in the shape of a paw. And this one is another similar one I did that has home with a dog paw. So as you can see, you can get it creative, mix it up, have different shapes, designs, sizes, depending on how many hooks you want or what kind of hooks, to have a variety of dog leash options. If you like this video, please like, comment, hit subscribe, or if you'd like any other project ideas, I am open to suggestions. I hope you enjoyed. Go out and create something new. Thanks for visiting.